So this morning, hopefully you had a chance to read through Revelation 13 and then Daniel 7, because we're going to talk all of the stuff today that's in Revelation 13, basically looking at, can we identify, or do scholars identify who the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth are, what those are representing? Now, if you read through Revelation 13 and Daniel 7, and you're scratching your head like, what the heck is that all about? Then you're in the right place, because you just got a piece of Jewish apocalyptic literature that seems almost impossible for anybody to try to decipher. So we'll go through some of that today. So Revelation 13 is going to be our main topic. So if you want to open your Bible to Revelation 13, we're going to be reviewing many of the sentences and showing how we can connect things that are there in Asia to sentences in Revelation 13. On your screen, what's going to be my background picture is the city of Aphrodisias. So in my email, I had a link. If you had maybe had a chance to go check out that city called Aphrodisias, to the goddess Aphrodite, hence that's where they get the name. It's her city. And I'm assuming that many of you who have traveled to Turkey got to stop there because it's near it. I'll show you where it is on the map. But this is a city that's not part of the letters, but what's there, what you're looking at right there, is a temple that they built to the Roman emperors. And that's going to come into how we read some of the things in Revelation. It had to be amazing to see it. The pictures today just won't do it justice as usual because you just can't capture the fullness of it. But anyways, that's the back picture, Aphrodisias and a temple to the imperial cult, the emperors, and we'll keep seeing this all day long. All right, so a little bit of review before we start. This is review of how we're looking at Revelation, because so many of us have taken classes on the book of Revelation that are only talking about future events. So when you get to the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth in Revelation 13, generally people think immediately, well, who is that today? Not that we can't have some sense of who that is, but we're looking at the book of Revelation, as scholars would call it, the preterist way of looking at it. And all that means is we're saying, what would you have thought if you're part of John's church living in Ephesus? You're watching the unfolding of world events around you. He sends a letter and somebody reads Revelation 13. What are the images? What are all the stuff that says, aha, I know what John's talking about? And that's the way that the preterist looks at it, is how does John speak to the world then? So there's a whole nother side of scholarship that says, what does it mean today and what's it going to mean at the end of times? We'll let those scholars deal with that. This study is looking at it as, what did the first century people hear based on what was going on in their culture? The reason that's so difficult for us is, well, we live in the West and we live in the modern West, and to understand the ancient culture and the way that they convey truth is often difficult, confusing. Okay. There's a second way to read Revelation, and we're also going to try to intermingle this. It's called the idealist, and this says Revelation speaks of these transcendent principles that are essentially around at all times in some way, shape, or form. So there's a constant battle of good versus evil. So on all of these stories, you could say, okay, that was happening then. How do we apply it to our life today? How do we see it in the world today? Because they're things that tend to not go away. So they're transcendent principles that are always there. And then finally, and this is where, if you read those chapters and you thought, what the heck am I reading? Well, it's because you're reading Jewish apocalyptic literature, or the genre of the literature is Jewish apocalyptic, excuse me. And in Jewish apocalyptic writing, this is Isaiah 27. That's, you'll see, we'll pull a verse from there. The book of Daniel has apocalyptic writing. Many of the writings that happen between the Old Testament and the New Testament are apocalyptic type writings. The Dead Sea Scrolls, much of that. And they use a lot of symbols to convey what's going to happen. And it's usually something about the end of an age. Now, when does that mean, end of the age? Is that tomorrow? Is it today? Is it 1,000 years from now? And maybe the answer is yes, for all of those, all of the above. It stems from the indestructible hope of the Jewish people that God is on the throne. And as much evil as you see in the world around you today, he is the judge. He has not moved off of his throne, and there will be a day where judgment happens. So any apocalyptic writing is about judgment, and it's the end of a time and the beginning of a new age, and there's a new Jerusalem that shows up, and it's about this future hope that pulls you along in a world that seems crazy. And boy, if we need hope that's going to pull us through a world that seems crazy, that can speak to us today as we look out our window and think, what just happened? So that's Jewish apocalyptic writing. And we're going to talk today about symbols and how these symbols tell us the story. Okay. As I mentioned, the main question is going to be, in Revelation 13, there's the beast of the sea and there's the beast from the earth. And our question is, who are these? Or who do scholars think that these are based on what we find on the ground? That's what we want to look at. And so the way I want to do this today is I'm going to give you the answer ahead of time. I'm going to give you the answer of what scholars come up with, and then we're going to backfill so that as we're going through the material, you can see then, oh, that's why they came up with that answer, how they identify this sentence in Revelation 13 with this thing happening over here. So Revelation 13, if you have it open in front of you, starts out, and by the way, I'm using this one as the NASB. I'll show you why in a second. Starts out like this. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. So if you don't have NASB or NIV, you might think, hey, Scott, my chapter 13 doesn't start with that sentence. Well, look at the very last sentence of chapter 12, because some Bible translators have put that sentence, you know, when the person who divided up the chapters and verses did that, sometimes the sentences don't make sense where the dividing line was. So it's helpful to reference, but it doesn't always. So you can see the NASB pulled that sentence forward into chapter 13. Now, if you happen to have one that shows it in the last sentence of 12, well, just remember in the first century, there were no chapters and verses. It just would have been the next sentence, they would call it. Okay, so here's our first symbol. The dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. So we'll talk about dragon. Next, then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. So we're going to talk about who's that beast. Having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. So there's the dragon and the first beast, the beast out of the sea. If we go down about halfway through the chapter, verses 11 and 12, we get this sentence. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. So we're talking now separate beast moving. Again, now we're going to get into this strange symbolism. He had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke as a dragon. Now here's the key to understanding. It's verse 12. He, being the beast out of the earth, exercises all the authority of the first beast. We'll see that, how this plays out. And, oh, by the way, next part of the sentence, he makes the earth and all who dwell in it worship the first beast. Show you how that shows up. It's pretty wild how that shows up. Okay, so those are the 2 beasts we want to talk about. And then, of course, who are they? So here's the answer, at least. You have the dragon, and I put the words of chaos because the dragon is always representative of the chaotic world. Then you have the beast of the sea, and then you have the beast from the earth. So those are the three symbols we just saw. And what John's he's going to tell us in chapter 12 that the dragon is actually the devil or Satan. He says that in verse 9. And it's that force of chaos in the world. It's the spiritual force of chaos that then gets manifested into things that are happening here on earth. The dragon is the dragon of chaos. John calls him the devil. So he does that fairly explicitly. The beast out of the sea is Rome. We'll show why that is, but it's Rome. And then the beast from the earth is going to be the cities of Asia or the leaders of the cities of Asia. Some scholars say, well, it's the priests of the imperial cult. So you had very wealthy, important people that became priests of the imperial cult. So maybe it's those people, but it has to do with the people of the earth. And the earth, to them, is Asia Minor and the leaders in that area that are involved with the imperial cult. All right, so that's the answer right there. Now let's backfill. Where do they get that from? So the first place, and of course, this is why I tied this lesson to Ephesus. So even last week when I said we were done with Ephesus, that was a lie. We're coming back to Ephesus. So we have to say, if we're the church at Ephesus where John lives and he's our pastor, and we're watching the events around us, what would we think about beast out of the sea or beast from the earth as he describes them? So if we go back to Ephesus, looking down from above, there's some things that we notice. The first one is there was a harbor. It's the sea. And the sea, in the Jewish mind, comes from our Old Testament, is always the abyss. It's the chaotic waters that are God's enemy. So the sea. Now, who comes, of course, out of the sea? So you have the sea, right? Then we have roads. You have this road called Harbor Street. It goes right into that theater. Then you take a right and you start going down what's called Marble Street. Then if we switch the camera, because I couldn't get a wide enough shot, there's Marble Street going through downtown Ephesus. You take a left and you go up what's called Curate Street, and that means priests. That's a word for the priests. And you come to what we've seen before, and it's a temple. And it's a temple to Domitian, the emperor at the time of John. And Domitian is the one, as we've talked about before, who's going to demand that you worship him as Lord and God. He's going to enforce the imperial cult like no one had done in 100 years. Well, actually, no one had done. He's trying to revive the past, to say, I am now the Lord and God, and you worship me. What's interesting, though, about this particular temple, this temple was being built while John is pastoring there. At the time of Revelation, this is being built. And it's being built by the people of Asia Minor, the cities of Asia Minor. And this they found archaeologically, all the inscriptions that say, we, the people of wherever, are the ones who are building this. It's the people from the earth. And they're building a temple to worship Domitian as God. So that is sponsored by the cities of Asia Minor. Second point that we need to make is this is not the only place in Ephesus that was being built at the time that's going to declare that Domitian is Lord and God. Now, we haven't looked at this one yet, so you don't know about it. But if we go back to our picture of where the harbor is, where that ancient harbor sat, during the time of John, during Domitian's reign, he decided that he was going to remodel the harbor area. So this area right there that I put on the screen, the blue square, and I should put not to scale, of course. I just want you to show you where this is happening. he decided to build a gymnasium. And I put the word temple in quotes because it's not a real temple, but it's a place that Domitian is going to declare he's Lord and God. It's a gymnasium. And huge gymnasium. They even had, he sponsored games like the Olympic Games. He sponsored Ephesus Games. And when you arrive at the Ephesus Games, you declare that Domitian is Lord and God. So this particular gymnasium is dedicated to Domitian, and I want to show you something about gymnasium where scholars say, aha, this is how Domitian is going to tell you he's Lord and God. So the first point about gymnasium, at Olympia, you have a Zeus temple. You also have a huge gymnasium there, and the gymnasium is part of the worship of Zeus. So as scholars look at what Domitian did, who's he declaring he is by building a gymnasium multiple times larger than the Zeus gymnasium and putting on games there? He's Zeus. He's Zeus incarnate, and that's what he wants you to believe. So you have gymnasium. That's point one. You can connect it to Olympia. Point two, gymnasium is a school. See, we think of gymnasium as a place to only work the body. I go to the gym to work on my body. But not back then, and actually not today in many countries in Europe. Gymnasium means school. You go there to work the body and the mind. So you have classes, and you have students, and you have teachers, and so it's a place of your entire being is being honed there in the Greek model or a Roman model. So the question we have to ask, and I'll show you a picture of why we have to ask this. This is the gymnasium in Sardis. And the only reason I'm showing you this one is because they've rebuilt the gymnasium, and it helps explain what I want to talk about. As you go into that gymnasium where you're working on both your mind and your body, you're at school, you're going to go into an area and you see where that circle is up there. There's going to be a statue. So every gymnasium has what's called an apse. Now, Christian churches have an apse as well, but it comes from this style of building worship places. And the apse, so up in that apse would be a statue. And the statue is going to tell you by whose authority all learning happens. So if it's the Roman emperor, whose statue is going to be up in that apse? Well, Caesar, because it's by his authority that all things exist, and he's the arbiter of truth. And so you put his statue in the apse to say, it's my authority that you're in this school you learn. Now, this is the same question we struggle with today. Who's in the apse in the school that you're sending your kid or your grandchild? And you better make sure that the right statue is in the apse, or else you don't know by whose authority your kids are being taught. So in that gymnasium in Ephesus would be a statue of Domitian to say, I am Lord and God. It's by my authority that all things are pronounced true. And I think this is, the part of the reason why Christians want to send their kids to Christian schools, because who's in the apse? Well, it's God. And what are we afraid of when we don't want to send our kids to other schools? Because who knows who's in the apse? Man, definitely. By man's authority that all things are true. So it's still an issue today. Who's teaching your kids and what worldview are they teaching them? And you declare that by putting the statue in the apse. So you go back to this picture of the gymnasium down here at Ephesus, and you'd say, well, who's in the apse there? Who's declaring themselves the arbiter of truth and Lord and God? And it's Domitian. So this building down here is a place to show up and worship Domitian as Lord and God. Now, I'd show you a bunch of pictures, but there's just not much there. It just looks like old buildings that got knocked down. Here's one shot. That's just some Roman architecture that went up. The only reason I show you this is the Flavian family. Then, sorry if I'm just throwing names at you. That's Vespasian, Titus, and then Domitian. They took the bull as their symbol. So you can see that's 4 bulls there. Anyways, so that's from the time of when they're building this. So my point is this. As you're sitting there, John and your house church in Ephesus, while Domitian's reign is happening, you're watching 2 places being built. Massive. One scholar was saying he thinks this is probably the largest building project, that gymnasium, that Ephesus ever had. And you're watching it happen because it takes multiple years. What do you tell your church if you're a pastor? Are they going to force us to worship Domitian? What happens when we walk past? Do we have to put incense on the incense altar? And so as a pastor, struggling with what are you going to tell your people? Or what are you going to tell your kids or your grandchildren when this thing gets done and Domitian's going to show up to see how the work was done? Are you going to have to participate? It's a massive question as you're watching this. So out of the sea comes somebody who's building a place where you're going to have to worship him as Lord and God. At the same time, you have something inland, right? And this one inland is sponsored by the cities of Asia. Those are the peoples of the earth. So you can see that even in this little microcosm of Ephesus, there's a beast coming out of the sea. That's Rome, who's going to force you to worship him. There's a beast of the earth. That's whatever the power structure is in Asia Minor. They're going to force you to worship the beast with that temple there. And both are happening. Both are being built while John is pastoring his church there at Ephesus. Okay, so that's at least one example. I'll show you another one. But if we look at the symbols again, so the dragon of chaos, that's always the demonic force that's behind the evil that's being played out in humans. You have the beast that comes out of the sea, that's Rome. And you have the beast from the earth, that's the people who are participating in that, forcing you to worship. Now, why would they do that? Why would they participate? Well, it's for their benefit. Because if you keep Rome happy, you get wealthy, more powerful. You share in the process. So they're participating in what John ultimately says is coming from the devil. It's going to force you into the worship of something other than God. Okay, that's the answer that we're driving at. Now, let me just walk through some of the symbolism. It's important to remember, as John's writing in symbolism, they understand those symbols much better than we do. One resource that I've given you multiple times, but I'll say it again because it's quite helpful when you get to symbolism like this, is it's called the Dictionary of Biblical Imagery. And they'll go through every image in the Bible and then tell you what's the meaning behind it, that in the ancient world, it meant X, Y, or Z. So what we see under the heading, under the dictionary category of monster, is where we get dragon, you get the beast out of the sea. If you remember a few months ago, we talked about St. George's dragon. And, as every story of a knight versus a dragon is telling the same story. It's this story from the biblical story of the chaos that exists just beyond order and to be brave enough to go out and face the chaos. That's St. George and the dragon. Okay, so if we walk down this list of symbolism that John's going to be drawing upon, you see that there's symbolism of water or the sea. Now, the sea is always seen as a chaotic force. So even Genesis 1:2, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and empty. There was chaos, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the deep. So it's a picture of these chaotic deep waters, right? And then God speaks, boom, and the waters divide. The chaos flees when God's words are spoken. So that's the chaotic abyss. Also, think about Jesus when he heals the demon-possessed man at the Sea of Galilee, and the demons say, "Send us into the pigs," and the pigs run into the sea, because that's where the demons live, is they're going home. It's a picture of the demons go into the pigs, but they go into the abyss, and Luke even uses the word abyss. So it's a picture of where the demons live. All right, so that's water, and we'll see that in a second. Both stories start with the sea. You have the dragon of chaos. That's the force that fights against God's order. God creates order. The dragon creates chaos. So it's that sea monster, or the chaos just outside of our domain of order. You also have a word that shows up, sometimes used as a synonym for this, is Leviathan. And the Leviathan is like a coiled serpent of chaos. Now notice that the word chaos is in every one of these definitions, because what are they fighting against? Well, they're fighting against the disorder, the chaos that's created by the malevolent spirits. All right, so I'll give you one example. Don't turn there because we don't have time. But Isaiah 27:1, when you get a chance, go back and read Isaiah 27, because this is an example of apocalyptic literature. And Isaiah 27 starts out like this. On that day, the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent. Now that uses the word Leviathan. Then it says, and he will kill the dragon, different word, who lives in the sea. Where does the evil, chaotic monster of chaos live? In the abyss below. That's all the imagery that they use. Now, what we're going to see is that Isaiah, he uses this imagery, but he's talking present day. He's going to assign those images to the enemies of Israel, Assyria, Babylon. You're the dragon that's coming up out of the sea. So he historicizes it by placing it in the context of what's happening around them. Okay, so that's just one example of where you see Leviathan and this idea of a monster or a dragon who lives in the sea. So you have those three symbols, and then you can look at them, and at least the Bible does. The Bible and the prophets and even John here looks at them on two levels. The first one is on the cosmic level. They're like, that's the enemy of God. That's the devil or Satan. It's the enemy of God that takes God's created order and descends it into chaos, flips everything on its head. That's the cosmic level. Well, what about in the earthly level? What's happening down here? Well, there you start assigning it to the countries that are fighting God. So in this case, when we say, why do scholars think that they're talking Rome? Well, because Rome arrives from the sea. So they literally come out of the sea. Second, if Rome is the representative of the devil, well, where in a Jewish mind, where are they coming out of? They're coming out of the abyss. So he uses all this symbolism to say that Roman Empire that's coming is the power behind it are the demonic forces of Satan. Okay, so it's very important that we get that symbolism correct, because it helps our minds say, okay, now I can see what John is talking about. Now, the dragon of chaos. The dragon of chaos is anybody that takes God's created order and flips it on its head. Now, that's a transcendent principle, because wherever you are in history, whoever is taking God's created order and flipping it upside down, right is wrong, black is white, good is bad, because it creates chaos. When you can't call something that's bad, bad, when everybody is telling you, oh no, that's not bad, that's actually good, it creates chaos in the world. So Isaiah 5:20, this is a famous one. You guys all know this one. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Now, that is exactly what the enemy of God does. So when the devil's working his schemes, it's always to flip the created order. You may remember that it was that song by the from the 60s by the Rolling Stones. There's a song called Sympathy for the Devil. And there's a line in Sympathy for the Devil that says, where every cop is a criminal and all the sinners are saints. And the whole song is about how the devil's going to flip everything on its head to where you can't figure out what's right or wrong. And remember last week we saw that in Ephesus, where if you can expand the temenos of Artemis, well then the criminals are now the saints. They're the ones being protected by the gods. And what happens when the criminals become the saints? The place turns into chaos and corruption. But that happens from time to time. So anyways, that's how we can picture that dragon of chaos. Anybody who's flipping God's order on its head. Okay, moving on, because we have to keep moving here. Text to context. Always text to context, meaning John's always speaking Old Testament into whatever context he's in today, at that moment, because his Bible at that time is the Old Testament. So in this case, this is why I had you read Daniel 7. It's like he's rewriting Daniel 7, except he's going to leave something out, and we'll get to that in a minute. So if we just look Daniel 7 compared to Revelation 13, and I'll do this quickly, you start to see the same things popping up, right? Daniel 7 starts with the churning sea and the beast that comes out of the sea. Well, you can see that. You can see the churning sea is that chaotic waters. He's pulling on that imagery. And then a beast comes out of the sea. And how does Revelation 13 start out? You have a dragon standing on the seashore, and this beast comes out of the sea. Daniel 7 talks about a beast that's like a leopard. Revelation 13 talks about a beast that's like a leopard. You have, in Daniel 7, the beast is given authority to rule. Well, what happens in Revelation 13? The dragon gives the beast authority to rule. So Rome's rule isn't just on their own behalf, it's coming from the dragon. There's a reference to 10 horns. Whatever that means, I have no idea. In Revelation 13, you get 10 horns, right? Now think about this. If in Revelation 13, if it's Rome, John also said there's 7 heads. So for those of you who have been to Rome, or even if you haven't been to Rome, how many hills is Rome built on? 7 hills. So he's got the 7 heads are the representative of the 7 hills of Rome. There's a mouth that's going to speak boastfully. That's Daniel 7. And then in Revelation 13, you've got blasphemies being spoken. And throughout this study, we've noticed, look at the titles that the Caesars are taking on. Lord and God, Savior, Savior of the world, God from God. It's those are blasphemous titles that they're taking on. So John is right in the midst of Daniel 7. He's almost rewriting it to say what you see in Daniel 7 is happening right now here in Ephesus or in Asia Minor in a larger scale. But what's the point of Daniel 7? Because this is what John's going to leave out, and it's brilliant because it tells his audience, if they're studying their Bible, their Old Testament, they know what Daniel 7 is about. And so you read that and you think, he's quoting Daniel 7. But what's the overall message of Daniel 7? Well, the message of Daniel 7 is God is opening up the court. Daniel 7 says the Ancient of Days is sitting down at the court, right? And then Daniel 7 goes on to say, and one like the Son of Man who comes riding on the clouds. And the whole thing is about judgment and how the court is going to judge those nations. And oh, by the way, the Son of Man is going to have an everlasting kingdom. Now, if you know that part of the story, which certainly Caesar could have figured that one out or had someone tell him, now what do you think about John's message? Because that says, hey, Caesar, you think you're in charge today? Not so fast, because the judge of the world is going to eventually judge you, and this kingdom will not last forever. But the Son of Man will. So it's so cool how John does that, because it's just great that he leaves out the part about the judgment that's about to come down on Caesar's head. All right. So the beast from the earth. The beast from the earth receives authority from the first beast. That's all the people under the reign of the Roman Empire there in Asia Minor. They're going to make the people worship the first beast. I'll show you that in Aphrodisias in a minute. And then they're going to assist the Roman Empire on behalf of the Roman Empire. So they're complicit in this whole game. Now, again, how do we know that? Where else can we get, besides every single city that you visit, you can find evidence of this, but there's one that's prominent. It's an amazing place, and it's a city called Aphrodisias. And so I don't know, again, if who's been there or who hasn't. Let's go take a look what's there, because what's there tells us the story of the imperial cult, of those Roman emperors. We mentioned this, how much of our New Testament is written in this area, right? This area, Asia Minor, we call it, you have so much of your New Testament happening there. Well, if there was one place in the entire world where the worship of the imperial cult was the leading area for the worship of the emperors, it's right here. You find here what you don't find in the rest of the Roman Empire, at least on the steroids that it's on. Pergamum, we went to Pergamum. That's the Neocorus, the temple keeper for Caesar Augustus. Smyrna, that's the Neocorus, the temple keeper for Tiberius. Ephesus becomes the Neocorus, the temple keeper for Domitian and the Flavian family. So all of these cities, Asia Minor is leading the way when it comes to forcing people into the worship of Rome. And the gospel writers who grew up in these little teeny towns in Israel said, let's go there. We'll put our truth on display in front of them, and they flipped the world on its head. So there's Pergamum, Smyrna, Ephesus. We have Laodicea and Colossae, Hierapolis, that's out to the east. And then one valley over from Laodicea, you can see that pin for Aphrodisias. Now, just a little history. Pergamum used to have the leading school of sculptors. So remember that Zeus temple that is now in the Berlin, Pergamum Museum in Berlin, that Zeus temple or altar up in Pergamum, and just how amazing the sculpture is. That school of sculpture moved from Pergamum to Aphrodisias. So when that moved, now apparently there's much better marble down by Aphrodisias, but they moved, and that's important to note. So here's Laodicea, and then right over one valley, it's like a completely empty valley, and then you pull up to this city, and you see this. I mean, there's like nobody in the valley, and then you have this amazing, beautiful, because the marble is so amazing, city of Aphrodisias. That right there is the gate to the temple area, the Temenos, where the temple to Aphrodite is. It's a very unique gate style, and of course, it's just amazing. The marble is incredible to look at. So that's the gateway to go into the temple to Aphrodite. I mentioned it's also a school for sculptures, so everywhere you look are just stacks of, a lot of them you can tell, they might not even be finished. Someone was just working on them. They're just practicing their sculpture, and you can see they just stack them up. I mean, you see that whole row, just stacks of what people were working on in the school, whether they were ever used in buildings or not. Okay, so where we want to go is right here in Aphrodisias, because what they did was they built a temple, not because they were told to, because they did it on their own. And they wanted to build a temple to the Roman emperors to say, they are Lord and God. So as you enter this, there would have been a huge gate that's not there any longer. And at the very end of that, where that yellow circle is, would have been the temple. So there's a temple right at the end of that. It's about 300 feet long, so think one football field. And then the way they built it was the first level underneath that yellow line is like a colonnade and shops and whatever. And then above that, and this is what we want to look at, is you have a series of panels. So you have a middle row of panels. Those panels, I'll show you a better picture in a minute, tell a story. And then you have an upper row of panels. And the panels tell you the story of the Roman imperial cult. And now on the other side, you have the same thing. So you'd have to imagine, it's hard to envision that there's two giant walls on either side of you that are telling this glorious story of who the Roman emperors are. There you can see some of them. Now, when we were there, the day that we were there, we couldn't go into the actual room of the museum that holds a whole bunch of panels. If you go on the internet, you can find the museum website and pictures of a lot of these panels, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But we couldn't go in there that day. So anyways, there's the panels. And now we look at those panels and I just think, well, I don't know, some people, a horse, whatever. But those panels, to the first century mind, are telling you a story through symbols. So someone who knows how to read the panel would be able to tell you that symbol is this, it's telling you this, they're moving like this. So we kind of have to do some deciphering of what are these panels telling us about the Roman Empire. So there's a number of things, and they have the rows of panels divided. So the first thing is there are panels describing the land and the sea. And what they're describing is that underneath the Roman Empire, from the blessings of the Roman emperors, the land and the sea are abundant. There's fish in the sea, the crops are growing. Now, part of that is because the Caesars pushed all the wars out to the edges. So if you're living in an area where there is no war, then generation after generation of generation doesn't have to rebuild. And you can start moving ahead in a way that you've never had before, and that's what happened. But the land and the sea are abundant. Now, we read our Bible, where does the abundance of the land come from? Well, God. To us, that's what our Bible tells us. They're saying that the abundance of the land and the sea come from the Roman emperors. Next, they tell you there's a whole set of panels that are going to talk about the divinity of the emperors. And they do this by intermingling the Greek gods and what those Greek gods represent with the emperor. And the emperor is always nude. So if you see the emperor nude, it means he's being portrayed as a deity, because Greek gods are always portrayed nude. So when you take the emperor and make him nude, it says he's now a deity. So I want to show you one example. This is not from Aphrodisias, but it gives us probably the best example for our discussion today. And you can easily find this on the internet. It's a piece of jewelry, essentially, that was created for Caesar Augustus somewhere around 30 AD. And it's just like those panels at Aphrodisias that are describing something that's going on. So now, again, you look at that thing and you say, wow, there's a lot going on, and I don't know what any of that means. And you can find stuff on the internet that tries to help you decipher what they're telling you. But I want to show you a couple things. The first one is where that yellow circle is, that's Caesar Augustus. Now, it's Augustus and by implication, everybody who comes after him. But notice he's nude. Now, he does have a blanket on his lap, but he's nude, saying he's divinity. He's got a scepter, so he's ruling. And right at his feet is an eagle. That's the eagle of Zeus. So it's representing the power of Zeus manifest in Caesar Augustus. So that's Augustus. Notice all of the people on that upper part are all looking to him, meaning they're all giving honor to him. Now, what I want to point out, is the lady that's standing right behind him, right where my arrow's pointing. Now, she's putting something on his head. She's crowning him, right? And that woman right there is a personification of something. The Greek word, excuse my pronunciation, I'll probably get this wrong, oikomene. It's where we get the word ecumenical. And it means the inhabited world. And what that is saying in imagery is the whole world is crowning you as Lord and God. The whole world is recognizing your divinity. One of the panels, and I didn't have a picture of it, is Claudius and the inhabited world. So you find this all over the place when it comes to the emperors declaring that the whole world is going to worship them. I'll show you how John, what he works with that. Now, while we're on this page, I just want you to notice, though, at whose expense? What's the bottom half of that showing us? Well, these are the defeated enemy. So it isn't just I'm Lord and God because I bring peace. I destroy my enemies, or I punish them into peace. So, and then you have what they're putting up as something, it's where we get the word trophy. It's like a Roman trophy saying we just won the war. So you can see Caesar, they're saying Caesar is Lord, but it's at someone else's expense that they're dominating. Okay, let me show you where how John weaves this in, this idea that the whole world is going to worship. So when we get to Revelation 13:8, it starts like this, and the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast. That's what this is showing you. The inhabited world will worship the beast. John weaves that right into this Revelation 13. All the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast. Then he says the beast of the land exercises authority on behalf of the first beast and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast. That's right out of Roman imperial propaganda. It's amazing. It's so cool what John does. But so much of that is right here at that depicted on this building. It's telling you the story as you're watching a movie, as you walk towards the temple of whomever. The last part, it's all about Roman conquest. So there's a whole series of the panels inside that monument that are dedicated to Roman conquest, right? Just like that, what we just looked at, that little piece of jewelry. Yeah, Caesar's Lord, but underneath it is because we go out and we subdue everybody around us. So Roman conquest. This is a statue, and it's indicative of how they display Roman conquest. And excuse my language, but it's always depicted as a rape. So the rape of Britain, the rape of Armenia. If you Google rape of Armenia and Nero, you'll find one of the panels from this place. That's pictures Nero. So notice in this, you have a male figure that's nude. That's the emperor being shown as divine. Then you have a female. Now, what they're picturing is something from the Greek myths, but they're pulling it in and saying, no, that's the emperor today. You have a female, which is the other country that's about to be subdued. And it's always holding it in a position of, it's violence. It's an image of violence. This is how they show you. Now, can you imagine if we here in the United States, after a war, put up a statue that looked like this? Now, you can imagine the crowds would be going nuts if we were depicting a war against our enemy as a rape scene. So the Roman conquest. So the question we ask is, yeah, you get Roman peace, but who's suffering in order to get that peace, right? And it goes back to what we talked about a few weeks ago. There's a comparison happening in all of these, that John and Paul are saying we have to compare the kingdom of God to the kingdom of Rome. And the Roman way of doing things, and this is all over the Roman world in inscriptions and in these images the way that they portray it in these pictures, is it goes like this: piety, go back to our old religion; war, that's how we're going to subdue you; victory, and that leads to peace. So that's the Roman way. Well, what do Paul and John and all the disciples, even Jesus, show up and say? No, 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 no. It has nothing to do with war. It's covenant. We enter a covenant relationship with God. It's nonviolent means. It's forgive your enemy, not build an army and go to war against your enemy. It's justice for those in the world, not victory. It's not about winning. It's about making sure there's justice. That will lead to peace. So the entire book of Revelation is saying, whose path are you on? And the path of piety, war, victory, peace will eventually be judged. We don't want to be part of that judgment. So if Rome is out in a conquest, look what John writes in Revelation 13, verse 4. He says this, they worship the dragon for giving the beast such power. And they also worship the beast. And what do they say about the beast? Who is as great as the beast? They exclaim, who is able to fight against them? Why would you fight against Rome? Because you're just going to get stomped by the Roman boot. Okay, so we go back to this. This is the whole thing. The whole thing is, what do these symbols mean in Revelation 13? Well, they come from Daniel. John's putting him in the context of his day, and it's not only Rome, the people that come out of the sea on behalf of the dragon, but it's the people who are going to help put that in, enforce that in the world. So that's hopefully I was able to show you that unless we know that that's all over the world, all over that ancient world, particularly Asia Minor, well, then you can read just about anything into Revelation 13 because it's just so ambiguous. Okay. Finally, then we have to ask this. Well, what happened with Domitian? Because John's speaking Domitian judgment, right? He's saying, Domitian, you think you're Lord and God. One day you'll find out you're not. So what happened with Domitian? Well, in 96 AD, he was assassinated by his own people. Now, you know things had to be pretty bad if your own people decide to take you out. But he was assassinated. Now, I'm not saying that's God's judgment. God will deal with those people who murdered him because it's murder, and God says you shall not murder. God will deal with those people. The part that is the judgment comes next. After he was assassinated, the Roman Senate voted that his name is no longer going to be in the memory of the people. Damnatio memoriae. And what they find all over Ephesus and wherever Domitian had his name inscribed somewhere is they chiseled out your name. And for a Roman to have your name chiseled out of something in stone that's like eternal is the worst thing ever. Part of the reason we put a gravestone, it's a stone. The stone represents eternity because it's been there longer than us. It'll be there longer than us. You engrave a name because the name tells you of the memory of this person. That's why when someone's buried without a headstone, it seems like such an affront to the justice of the world to say. So Domitian ultimately will meet his judgment because we have faith that God is a righteous judge, and that's part of the letter to Revelation. Okay, so that's Beast from the Sea. Hopefully, I was able to add. I just want to do a quick PS if I can. Quick PS, because I know if you read Revelation 13, everybody wants to know, what does the 666 mean? What's the mark of the beast, right? So now there's way too much of 666 for today. But I want to show you something that's just fairly where scholars point to. It's something that scholars will say, that's intriguing. Okay, what's the number of the beast? This is our PS. So if you read Revelation 13, well, even if you didn't read it, here it is. The last sentence in Revelation 13 says, let the one with understanding solve the meaning of the number of the beast. For it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Now, John loves to play with numbers. He loves to do 666 is a triangle number. It's the triangle of 38. So it's an important number in their world. And where the first place scholars say is, well, does somebody's name add up to 666? And that's generally what people hear is Nero's name. Nero and I think another word add up to 666. I'm not an expert in how they're coming up with that, or at least the Nero part, but they identify Nero. That's the idea. You could also, it goes back to Genesis when God's creating the heavens and the earth. Day 6 is when he creates man, but he also creates the beast. And so you could weave something in there to the 666 as well. But okay, check this out. There's one sentence we didn't cover in Revelation 13 at the beginning. It says this: I saw that one of the heads of the beast seemed wounded beyond recovery, but the fatal wound was healed. Now, what's that a reference to? And because this fatal wound was healed, the whole world marveled at this miracle and gave allegiance to the beast. So when the scholars read that, plus the 666 in Nero, they point to this legend that you can read about it. The legend is called Nero Redivivus. And this legend was particularly popular in Asia, in the East. Nero committed suicide, at least that's what they think, committed suicide in 68 AD. And suddenly this legend pops up out to the east that he never really died, that he was never really dead. And the legend that Nero was going to return. And some people said he was out in the east and he's going to raise an army from the east and come back. And whether that was a good thing or a bad thing is up to you. But there were at least 3 imposters, people that looked like Nero, that showed up and tried to lead a revolution. One of the last one, the final one, the third one, was during the reign of Domitian. So there's this whole legend where somebody died, appeared to die, but actually didn't. And so scholars think John's weaving in this whole idea that one day Nero is going to return. That's what very popular there in Asia, that Nero would somehow return and rule the world, I suppose, or whatever Nero was going to do. But it's just an interesting point. If you've never heard of that, I just wanted to show you that there's a strange legend about a king who never really died. The first time I read it, I was like, it kind of reminds me of Elvis Presley, right? For a long time, Elvis Presley, many people said he never died. And you're like, there's another king that people thought didn't die. For some, I think even today they still do surveys and there's still a percentage of our population that says Elvis didn't die. Anyways, so just some thoughts on 666, and at least hopefully that'll put you in the right direction if you want to study more about it. Thanks for joining us under the fig tree for today's lesson. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button below. And make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that bell to be notified every time I upload a new lesson. You can also check out more teachings here at our YouTube channel or at figtreeteaching.com and enjoy learning about the sweetness of God's Word.